I changed my bank account information and started receiving my pension on a brand new card. When I got home, my daughter and her husband were already waiting for me, their faces seething with rage. But after, I calmly threw 53 pages of bank statements on the table, exposing all of their despicable leeching. Both of them fell dead silent, the color completely draining from their faces. Hello everyone. Thank you for being here. Before we get into exactly what happened after I threw those 53 pages on the table, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Let's begin. When I turned the doorknob and stepped into my house that Thursday afternoon, I never could have imagined that my own flesh and blood daughter would be standing there waiting for me, her eyes burning with pure hatred. The chill of the street still lingered on the shoulders of my coat, but the air in the living room was suffocating, heavy with an almost unbearable tension. The room that used to be my ultimate sanctuary was now thick with a toxic atmosphere. Michelle stood like a statue in the middle of the living room. My living room, in the house that Helen and I had scrimped and saved every single penny to buy 35 years ago. His face was flushed red, slowly shifting to a deep purple hue of uncontrollable rage. They didn't even give me a chance to close the door behind me. Are you out of your damn mind? Michelle's voice tore through the silence like a rusty blade. She took 3 quick, aggressive steps toward me. My husband almost had a heart attack at the ATM this morning. I calmly set my canvas bag down on the small table by the door. It was the same table where Helen used to leave her keys every time she came home from work, the little corner that had witnessed so many smiles and morning kisses. But absolutely nothing about this moment was ordinary. Where is the money, George? Kyle stopped pacing and spun to face me, his voice roaring with desperation. He shoved his phone right into my face, the screen displaying the banking app. There isn't a single goddamn penny left. His words were thrown in my face, dripping with venom. Every single syllable felt like it was trying to devour me alive. I was no longer the weak, lonely, and desperate old man of the past 3 years. I changed my banking information, I said, and even I was surprised by the sheer calmness in my own voice. My tone was steady, solid as a rock. My pension is now being directly deposited into a new card, a card that only I have the power to control. The silence that crashed down after that statement was utterly deafening. The antique grandfather clock in the corner of the room continued to tick rhythmically, counting every passing second. But inside this house, time seemed to have completely frozen. Michelle's mouth dropped open, but no sound came out. She looked exactly like a fish gasping for air on the riverbank, her jaw moving continuously but producing nothing. It was the eerie moment of silence right before a bomb detonates, where everyone knows the explosion is coming, but no one has the power to stop it. What? Michelle finally managed to gasp, clutching her chest as if she had just been dealt a fatal blow. Her voice was now reduced to a mere whisper. What did you just say? You heard me loud and clear, I replied. It was astonishing how incredibly satisfying I felt in this exact moment. It was a wonderful feeling to finally stand firmly on my own 2 feet, to no longer have to bow my head in apology, to no longer have to instantly scramble to fix the things that I had supposedly ruined in their selfishly constructed world. Dad, she stammered, you can't do that, you can't just… I can't do what? I asked, my voice still remarkably steady and unnervingly calm. I can't control my own money. The pension that I traded 41 grueling years of driving a truck across this entire country for. But we, Michelle's voice cracked. We depend on that money. We have expenses. We have debts to pay. Debts? I repeated the word slowly, savoring its bitter taste. Something deep inside me had gradually calloused over the past few weeks. A trip that I was conveniently never invited to? I coldly watched the color continue to drain from my daughter's face. Or maybe, I continued, and I could feel 3 long years of swallowed grievances surging up like a hurricane. You're talking about that massive television over there, or the ridiculously expensive gold necklace you're wearing around your neck right this second. All of it bought and paid for with my money, with my blood, sweat, tears, and my retirement fund. Kyle took a step forward, his index finger pointed directly at my face like a weapon, trembling with sheer rage. You are living in our house, he hissed, spit flying from the corners of his mouth. That is what's fair, old man. Our house, he had just said, our house. I felt something ice-cold and rock-hard press heavily against my chest. Our house. I let those words hang in the air for a moment, letting the bitter irony of it all sink in. It is incredibly fascinating that you are calling it that now, Kyle, I said, articulating every single word. Considering the property deed still only bears the names of my late wife and myself, has now suddenly become our house in my son-in-law's dictionary. I took a step forward, and surprisingly, they both instinctively took a step back. This is my house, I stated, my voice hardening more than it ever had before, firmer than I ever thought I was capable of. The house that I bought with the money made by my own two hands. The place where we built an entire life together. I looked at Michelle. I looked deeply into her eyes. I wanted her to clearly see the absolute disdain in my gaze. You two moved in here 3 years ago, I continued, my voice dropping lower but losing none of its firm resolve. 3 years ago when you lost your rented apartment because you couldn't afford the rent. I thought I was helping my family. My voice grew a little hoarse on the final word, but I fought hard to swallow the emotion. I didn't realize that I was inviting a pair of vultures into my home to pick my bones clean. I cannot believe you are saying these things to me, Michelle gasped, and now tears began to stream down her cheeks. But these weren't tears of remorse or sadness. After everything we have done for you, is this how you repay us? Everything they had done for me, those words hung between us like a brazen, shameless challenge. But before I could even respond, Michelle's face crumpled. Her voice rose, desperate and pleading, we. She stopped abruptly, seemingly realizing that she had just slipped up. Dad, Michelle stammered, her voice breaking completely. Dad, we depend on that money to truly understand how I ended up in a situation where I was facing off against my own daughter like this. I have to take you back to the darkest period of my life. The period where I thought I had completely lost myself. It all actually started 3 years ago, on a bright April morning, when the flowers were just beginning to whisper their colors to the world. I still vividly remember the sunlight that day. It wasn't harsh, but gentle and sparkling with golden hues, filtering through the kitchen window, while I sat at the table with a hot cup of coffee and the morning newspaper. I was shaking my head in disappointment at the score of a baseball game when I heard it. The sound of Helen's acoustic guitar. She was out in the backyard, sitting on the old wooden bench that we had built together over 20 years ago. Her slender fingers were gracefully gliding over the strings of her Martin D28. I had given Helen that guitar back in 1988 for our 11th wedding anniversary. She had cried, tears of pure joy rolling down her cheeks as she opened the case. That morning she was playing a soft, soothing melody, a tune I didn't immediately recognize. Perhaps it was something she was composing herself. The flowers were blooming vibrantly all around her, a mix of white and pink, and for a fleeting moment, everything in the world seemed so perfect it was almost surreal. I felt like I was looking at a painting, the ultimate masterpiece of my life. Then the music abruptly stopped. I looked up, frowning. Helen had put the guitar down on the bench beside her. She was clutching her chest tightly with one hand, her face contorted in something I couldn't comprehend at first. It was sheer agony. I rushed out the back door before I even consciously registered my actions. Helen, she looked up at me, her eyes wide with sheer panic and a desperate plea for help. She tried to say something, but no sound came out. Her hand gripped the fabric of her cardigan so tightly, her fingers twisting the wool, as if she were desperately trying to hold on to life itself. And then, she collapsed. I managed to catch her before she hit the ground, but just barely. She was heavier than I thought, or maybe I was just weaker than I realized. I gently laid her down on the soft grass, resting her head on my lap, brushing the stray strands of hair away from her forehead. Stay with me, my voice cracked, a sob catching painfully in my throat. Stay with me, sweetheart. I fumbled frantically for my cell phone, my trembling fingers managing to dial 911. The dispatcher's voice came through, steady and calm, asking questions that my panicked mind could barely process. Is she breathing? I didn't know. Her chest wasn't rising. Her eyes had closed. Can you start chest compressions? I tried, God knows. I tried my absolute best. The dispatcher kept talking, kept demanding things that my brain simply could not handle in that moment. All the sounds around me seemed muffled, The ambulance took 11 minutes to arrive, but to me it felt like 11 agonizing hours of pure torture. My ears were ringing. I just stood there frozen, a living statue, watching them load her into the back of the ambulance. I rode with her in the back. I held her hand tightly the entire way, gently stroking the cold back of her hand, even though I knew deep down she couldn't feel anything anymore. The double doors slammed shut, cutting me off from her world. I sat in the waiting room for 40 agonizing minutes, staring blankly at the television playing soulless images, surrounded by strangers who looked just as lost as I felt. When the doctor finally walked out, his surgical scrubs looked so cold and clinical. I already knew. I could see it on his face before he even opened his mouth. "Mr. Patterson," he said softly, sitting down on the chair next to me. "She has passed away. I am so incredibly sorry." I didn't cry. I didn't say a single word. I just nodded, as if he had just informed me that the baseball team had lost yet another game. Complete and utter numbness enveloped my entire being. I drove home alone. The guitar was still lying on the grass where Helen had dropped it. The flowers were still blooming vibrantly, completely indifferent to the fact that my entire world had just collapsed. Everything seemed to have retained its old appearance, but the very soul of the house had been violently ripped away. Our home was now nothing more than an empty shell. The first 6 months after Helen died were a living hell of absolute silence. I would wake up every single morning, and for the first half-second, I would unconsciously reach out to the other side of the large bed, expecting to feel her familiar warmth, only to have the cold, harsh reality slap me right across the face. She was no longer there. Over 40 years of ingrained habits were not easily broken. I would unconsciously brew 2 cups of coffee instead of 1, then stare blankly as the second cup slowly grew cold. Walking into the living room, I still expected to hear her humming a familiar tune in the kitchen, or the rhythmic clatter of her sewing machine from the small back room. The house was far too quiet. Every single room screamed of her absence. I stopped going to church. I couldn't bear the pitying looks from people I knew. I just didn't want to talk. I stopped doing everything, doing nothing but sitting motionless on my old armchair, staring blankly at the wall, desperately trying to find a reason to keep breathing, just to get through another day. Michelle stopped by a few times during that first month. She cried with me, her tears seemingly a profound sharing of my grief. She helped me pack away Helen's clothes, books, and keepsakes, carefully arranging them into cardboard boxes. She held my hand and told me that things would eventually get easier, that time would heal all wounds. She was lying. By the 6th month, things were worse than they had ever been. I started skipping meals. I couldn't even remember the last time I had taken a shower, and I frankly didn't care. The crushing loneliness gnawed at my soul, to the point where it manifested as actual, physical pain. Every single corner of the house held a memory that I couldn't escape from. Helen's reading glasses left on the nightstand, her favorite flower-patterned mug sitting in the kitchen cabinet, the deep indentation on the sofa cushion where she used to sit and knit. I was drowning in a house filled with ghosts of the past. And that was exactly when Michelle started visiting me more frequently. She would often show up completely unannounced, always dragging Kyle along with her. They brought with them a loud, forced, and incredibly awkward energy. She asked intrusive questions about my sleep schedule, brought bags of groceries that I had never asked for, and took it upon herself to unilaterally rearrange the items in my kitchen. She chattered endlessly about how difficult and incredibly dangerous it was for an older man to live all alone in such a large house. "Look at this, Dad. The dust is settling in thick layers," she would say, swiping her finger across a bookshelf. "You've lost so much weight. Are you even capable of cooking for yourself anymore?" But every time she left, if I paid close enough attention, I would always catch her eyes scanning over the furniture, the walls, and the spacious backyard with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. She scrutinized the antiques I had collected over the years, appraised the living room sofa set, and stared longingly at the expansive garden. A calculating glint, something that made my stomach churn with unease, even though in my grief-stricken haze, I couldn't explain exactly why. And then one Saturday afternoon, she arrived with Kyle in tow. This time, they didn't just bring bags of groceries. They brought 2 large suitcases and several cardboard boxes. "Dad," she began, her voice sickeningly sweet, gentle, and dripping with fabricated concern. "We really need to talk." I was sitting in the living room, my eyes staring aimlessly out the window. The grief still weighed heavily on my chest, like an immovable boulder. Some days I couldn't even force myself to get out of bed until well past noon. Michelle sat down right next to me on the sofa, the very same sofa that Helen and I had spent an entire afternoon picking out from a furniture store back in 1998, and grabbed my veiny, aging hand. "You really shouldn't be all alone in this massive house," she said softly, her tone laced with pity. "What if something happens? What if you slip and fall on the stairs, and there's no one here to help you?" She paused, her eyes welling up with tears that looked remarkably genuine. She must have spent hours practicing that exact expression in front of a mirror. "Dad, I am so worried about you. We are so incredibly worried about you." Kyle leaned against the doorframe, nodding along in agreement, perfectly playing the role of the dutiful, concerned son-in-law. "She's right, George. Too much maintenance, from the roof down to the heating system. Michelle and I have talked about this extensively." Michelle squeezed my hand even tighter, pressing her cheek against my shoulder. "What if we moved in here to live with you? You won't have to worry about a single thing, just focus on resting. And we will always be right here if you need us, day or night." I looked around the painfully empty house. Helen's reading chair sat vacant by the window. The silence was suffocating. The loneliness was executing me, day by day. "You want to move in here?" I asked slowly, my voice scratchy and hoarse. "Just for a little while, Dad," Michelle assured me, her eyes blinking with desperate hope. "We will make this house feel cozy and warm again. You won't regret it, I promise you. We will take incredibly good care of you." I should have asked questions. A man in his right mind would have undoubtedly questioned why they needed to move so suddenly, right at that very moment. But the grief had severely clouded my judgment. I was isolated, lonely, and desperately craving any kind of human presence in a house that felt more like a tomb. I just wanted to hear the sound of footsteps, the noise of laughter and conversation, anything to chase away the haunting ghost of silence. "All right." I heard my own voice echo in the room, one simple word, but it was the catalyst for a long series of incredibly dark days. That might be good." Michelle's face absolutely lit up with a wave of relief, a pure joy she couldn't even bother to conceal. She threw her arms around me and hugged me tight. "Oh, Dad, thank you. You'll see, everything is going to be so wonderful." Meanwhile, Kyle had already grabbed the suitcases and headed straight upstairs, without a single second of hesitation, long before I could even process what was happening or change my mind. I had no idea that I had just opened my front door and invited a pair of vultures inside. The first month went by, and it honestly wasn't too terrible. At least, that's what I desperately tried to tell myself. Michelle cooked the meals. Her cooking wasn't nearly as good as Helen's, often either too salty or incredibly bland, but at least they were hot meals, and I didn't have to sit at the table and eat completely alone. I felt somewhat useful when I helped out by washing the dishes or folding their laundry. Those mundane little chores made me feel like I was still contributing to a family, like I wasn't just a useless burden taking up space. They took over the master bedroom. "You really don't need all that space anyway, Dad," Michelle had casually declared during the second week. She said this as she nonchalantly moved all of her and Kyle's clothes into Helen's closet, packing her mother's old dresses away into cardboard boxes and shoving them aside. "The guest room is much more perfect for you. It's smaller, way easier to heat up, and it's right next to the half bath." I simply didn't have the energy to argue, and truth be told, I didn't really want to sleep in the room that was overflowing with memories of Helen anymore. The nostalgia was entirely too painful. I kept telling myself that this arrangement was only temporary. They were just helping me get through a major crisis. But by the second month, the masks began to crack. Everything started to change. One freezing December evening, Kyle knocked on my bedroom door. He stood there, hands shoved deep into his pockets, wearing a smug, unserious smirk. "Hey George, could I borrow $200? Just until Friday, it's going to help me land a stable job. You know how tough the economy is these days." $200 was a substantial amount of money for my fixed pension budget. But he was family. If this was going to help him find employment and finally become more independent, I was more than willing to help out. "Sure." I said, pulling out my wallet and handing him 2 crisp $100 bills. Make sure you study hard. He shoved the money into his pocket and gave a half-hearted nod. Thanks, George. Friday came and went. Kyle never mentioned the money again. He continued to wake up at 10 in the morning, lounging on the sofa all day, watching sports and scrolling endlessly on his phone. When I brought it up the following week, while he was drinking a beer in the kitchen, he looked incredibly annoyed, a deep scowl forming on his face. I'll pay you back, George. Jesus. Act like you're in desperate need of it or something. It's not like you have anything to spend money on anyway, that you need to hound me for it. He tossed the empty beer can into the trash and stormed off. I never saw that $200 again. In January, the exact same script played out, but this time it was Michelle. She came to me with tear-filled eyes, her voice quivering with dramatic distress. Dad, I hate to even ask you this, but we are in a really tight spot. The credit card bills are due, and if we don't pay them, we're going to get hit with massive interest penalties, and Kyle's unemployment check got delayed because of a system glitch. She wrung her hands together, looking the picture of utter despair. Could you possibly lend us $300 just to cover it for now? We will pay you back the second Kyle gets his money. I hesitated, remembering Kyle's outstanding debt, but Michelle was my daughter, my only child. She was standing right in front of me, looking so incredibly desperate. How could a father possibly turn away his own daughter when she was crying? Of course, I said, going to get the cash, and exactly as I should have predicted, that $300 evaporated into thin air, just like the last time. Not a single word was mentioned about it again, not a single promise of repayment. By February, their tactics had significantly upgraded. Michelle's tone was no longer pleading. It shifted into an authoritative stance of organizing things for the greater good. One evening after dinner, she slammed a thick stack of papers down on the kitchen table and pushed them aggressively toward me. Dad, look, paying these bills individually every month is incredibly tedious. It would be so much easier if your pension was just deposited directly into my account. Pay the utility bills, buy groceries, take care of absolutely everything. You won't have to worry about a single thing. You can just relax and enjoy your retirement. A massive wave of unease surged in my gut. Alarm bells started ringing violently in my head, but I desperately tried to ignore them. I don't know about that, Michelle. That's my money, my retirement fund. And we are using it for the whole house, Dad. She snapped back, her voice turning razor-sharp, completely stripping away the sweet facade she usually wore. Are you using it to buy anything for yourself? This way is simply more organized and efficient. Don't you trust your own daughter? She tapped her manicured fingernail against the stack of papers in front of me. They were bank authorization forms, power of attorney documents, dense paragraphs of legal jargon that an exhausted old man like me couldn't possibly read and fully comprehend. You just need to sign right here, she said, pointing to the bottom line on the last page and shoving a pen into my hand. It will make everything so much easier. I looked at the papers, and then I looked up at my daughter's face. A face that carried Helen's eyes, Helen's nose, but wore an expression that was entirely alien to me. A cold, calculated imposition. It's all for your own benefit, Michelle said softly, her voice attempting to soothe, but carrying an unmistakable weight of coercion. You don't want the stress of managing finances anymore. Especially while you're still grieving. Just let me handle it. My hand was trembling uncontrollably as I picked up the pen. I signed. I signed because I was exhausted, because I foolishly believed that blood ties would never betray me. I didn't realize that I was personally signing the death warrant for my own independence, surrendering total control over everything I had, my pension, my freedom, and my dignity. The trap slowly closed, so smoothly and quietly that I didn't even notice until both of my legs were already tightly bound. By March, my entire Social Security check of $2,300 a month was being funneled directly into Michelle's bank account. And just like that, I was no longer allowed to hold a single penny that I had earned with my own two hands. The small room at the back of the house was no longer a temporary arrangement. It had officially become a prison cell, and I had become a prisoner inside my own property. Once they had secured total control over my finances, their attitude completely shifted. It became radical and utterly ruthless. I didn't even realize the exact moment I stopped being a father and was reduced to a servant. It happened so gradually, so agonizingly slow, that by the time I was aware of it, everything was already set in stone, and a cowardly habit of compliance had seeped deeply into my blood. At first, it started with minor requests, thinly veiled under the guise of fake concern. "Dad," Michelle would say in the morning, "since you're up early anyway because you're used to it, could you make breakfast for me? I have to get ready for work." I didn't mind. I was used to waking up at 5 in the morning, a habit ingrained from 41 years of driving long-haul trucks hauling freight across state lines. Toasting some bread, frying up a few sunny-side-up eggs, and brewing a pot of coffee made me feel like I was still active, still pulling my weight, still a valued part of the family. But then, the requests began to drastically inflate. "Dad, since you're just lounging around the house all day with nothing to do, could you throw this load of laundry into the washing machine for me? Oh, and Kyle's dress shirts need the collars scrubbed by hand." Then it escalated to ironing those dress shirts for Kyle so he could go to his job interviews, even though those so-called interviews never yielded any actual results. Then it was scrubbing the toilets, vacuuming the living room carpets, mopping the kitchen floors until every last grease bubble disappeared. By April, I had been forced into a rigid, non-stop labor schedule. Wake up at 5 a.m., do preliminary cleaning. The afternoon was strictly reserved for yard work and pruning the bushes. And exactly at 4 p.m., I had to start prepping the ingredients for dinner. I had been transformed into a professional, unpaid maid in my own home, a servant who was essentially being paid with his own stolen pension. Worse yet, those requests rapidly devolved into blunt orders and then morphed into shrill, relentless criticisms. The breakfast was prepared too slowly. The dress shirts weren't ironed flat enough. The creases weren't sharp. The bathroom mirror still had faint smudges on it. Michelle would frequently stand in the kitchen, her arms crossed tight over her chest, her eyes scrutinizing my cleaning as she pointed out every single microscopic flaw. "How on earth did you wipe this counter, Dad? It's still greasy over here. Did you even use the right cleaning spray that I bought?" Kyle would just mumble from his spot on the sofa, never even bothering to take his eyes off his phone screen or the football game on the television. "George, the coffee tastes like watered-down garbage today. Did you add extra water to save a few pennies or something?" That was exactly what he called me. George, not Dad. There wasn't a shred of basic human decency or respect left. And I, a broken old man, suffocated by profound loneliness and the sheer terror of being abandoned, could do nothing but bow my head, apologize profusely, and start all over again. No one ever asked me how my day was going. Our conversation strictly revolved around household chores and endless, grumbling complaints. I had become nothing more than a tool, an animated piece of furniture that knew how to do housework in the kingdom they had just violently usurped. While I was living the miserable existence of a timid freeloader in my own house, they were living a life of absolute luxury. One Friday evening in May, they got dressed up in stunning, extravagant outfits. Michelle was wearing a brand new, deep blue dress with a plunging neckline, the expensive silk fabric clinging tightly to her curves. Kyle had slicked his hair back with shiny gel and sprayed himself with an overpowering, obnoxiously arrogant cologne. "Where are you two headed?" I called out from the kitchen, hunched over the sink scrubbing a pile of plates crusted with dried tomato sauce. "Dinner," Michelle replied, checking her lipstick one last time in the large hallway mirror. "That new steakhouse that just opened downtown. I heard the head chef has a Michelin star." "Oh," I said, wiping my wet, soapy hands on a ragged old apron. "What time should I be ready?" "Let me go change into a nicer shirt." Michelle paused, shooting a quick, loaded glance at Kyle. A silent, deeply irritated exchange passed between them. "Dad, that place is incredibly loud," she said, her voice strained and visibly forced. "You know how those trendy restaurants are. The music is blaring, the lighting is dim. You wouldn't like it at all. It would just give you another headache." My stomach instantly tied itself into knots. I knew that was just a bald-faced lie. "I don't mind the noise. It's just that we really want some privacy tonight," Kyle chimed in, his tone cold, blunt, and unapologetic. He didn't even bother to look in my direction. "You understand, right? A romantic date night." I understood perfectly. They left exactly at 6 p.m. The only sound keeping me company was the low, mechanical hum of the refrigerator. Afterwards, I retreated into my tiny back room and laid on my cramped bed, watching some outdated reality TV show on a cracked television screen. It was the very next morning that I found that fateful receipt. It had been shoved deep between the cushions of the living room sofa, while I was aggressively pushing the vacuum cleaner around. A flimsy, crumpled piece of paper from a high-end luxury jewelry store on Wisconsin Avenue. I carefully smoothed it out on the coffee table. The printed words slapped me right across the face. 14-karat gold necklace with diamond accents. Price, $1,650, $1,650. My hands began to shake violently. $1,650 for a necklace. I looked down at myself. I was wearing a faded flannel shirt that was fraying at the collar, my sneakers worn down to the bare rubber. I had to timidly ask for permission if I wanted a second scoop of rice at dinner. I didn't even dare to turn on the space heater in my freezing little room out of sheer terror that Michelle would incessantly nag me about the electricity bill. I slumped down onto the sofa, staring blankly at the receipt. Where did that money come from? From my pension, $2,300 a month, earned with 41 grueling years of my life. Sleepless nights in the cramped cabin of a big rig, chronic back pain, rushed unhealthy meals at greasy truck stops, missed birthdays, and missed piano recitals at the church. And they had taken my blood, sweat, and tears just to throw it away on a lifeless, frivolous gold chain. I clenched the receipt tightly in my fist, a fiery inferno of pure outrage erupting in my chest. I wanted to storm straight into their bedroom, my old bedroom, with the plush king-size bed, drag them out from under the covers, and demand a furious explanation. But then I stopped myself, because I was terrified that they would throw a massive tantrum, terrified that they would pack up and leave, abandoning me all alone in this deafeningly silent house, forcing me to face Helen's lingering ghost in every single corner. The loneliness was a monster far more terrifying than the sheer humiliation. So I swallowed my pride once again. I folded the receipt, shoved it deep into my pocket, choked down the massive lump of anger in my throat, and went right back to pushing the vacuum cleaner, quietly cleaning up the filthy mess they had left behind. My passive endurance might have just become a permanent pathetic habit if I hadn't discovered the horrifying truth about Helen's most sacred keepsakes. The absolute rock bottom of their depravity wasn't the fact that they were ruthlessly draining my bank account. It was that they were heartlessly trampling over the most precious, irreplaceable values of my entire life. Late one afternoon, while flipping through an old photo album, I paused on a picture of Helen smiling brightly, holding her Martin D28 guitar in the living room. That guitar had always been hung proudly on the wall right next to the fireplace. It suddenly dawned on me that the wall was now just a faded, empty patch of paint, and I hadn't seen the guitar once since they moved in. That evening, I waited patiently for Michelle to finish watching her television show before asking, "Where is your mother's guitar?" She was still mindlessly scrolling on her phone screen, loudly chewing a piece of gum, not even bothering to look up. I put it away in the storage shed out back. The storage shed? Why on earth would you put it in there? I want to have it out so I can look at it. She finally looked up, her face scrunching up in deep annoyance. Dad, you don't need it out here. It just takes up space and collects dust. Having a beat-up old guitar hanging around just makes the house look cluttered and messy when we have guests over. I stayed silent, but a sickening premonition told me something was terribly wrong. 2 weeks later, I finally gathered the courage to ask again, demanding a straight answer. This time, Kyle was sitting with his feet propped aggressively up on the coffee table, downing a beer. "Michelle, did you bring the guitar back inside?" I searched the entire storage shed out back, and it's not there. Michelle froze, exchanging a rapid, panicked glance with Kyle. She let out a long sigh and tossed her phone onto the cushion. "Dad," she said, her voice chillingly indifferent, "I sold it." It took a few agonizing seconds for those words to actually register in my ears, and even longer for my brain to process their horrifying meaning. "You did what?" "I sold it like a year and a half ago. I desperately needed cash to pay some bills back then." My chest felt like it was being crushed by an invisible vice. "You sold your mother's guitar?" "You sold the guitar that I..." "Dad, it was literally just gathering dust in the corner." she interrupted, her voice rising defensively, full of arrogant justification. Mom is dead. She obviously doesn't need it anymore. What's the point of keeping a useless pile of wood around? How much? My voice sounded completely hollow, trembling with shock. She hesitated, refusing to meet my eyes. $1,800 for a Martin D28 that I had saved up for 6 grueling months to buy. It was her voice, her physical embodiment, the gentle melodies that had warmed this home for decades. And Michelle had pawned it off for a fraction of its worth just to throw the cash into the black hole of their reckless, irresponsible debts. I stumbled out of the room before I said something I couldn't take back. But then a truly horrifying thought violently crossed my mind. I sprinted frantically into my tiny back room, yanked open the dresser drawer, and desperately rummaged around looking for the small wooden box. The oak jewelry box that held Helen's most precious keepsakes. The box that contained her pearl earrings, her grandmother's jade brooch, and most importantly, her diamond wedding ring. It wasn't there. I tore the entire room apart. I ripped the blankets off the bed, overturned the mattress, threw everything onto the floor. Nothing. My heart completely plummeted into the pit of my stomach. I stormed back into the living room, carrying a furious, unadulterated rage that I had never experienced in my entire life. My voice shook violently, hoarse with absolute fury. "Where is your mother's jewelry box?" "What box?" Michelle answered dismissively, her eyes still glued to the TV. "The oak box. The box that had your mother's wedding ring in it." I roared. She froze, the color draining slightly from her cheeks as she shot Kyle a desperate look for help. "Dad, I sold it." The room spun violently. The floor beneath my feet felt like it was cracking wide open. "You sold your mother's wedding ring?" I screamed, tears of sheer agonizing rage streaming down my face. The ring I worked double shifts for 6 months straight just to afford. The paramedics took it off her finger and placed it directly into my hand. That was her soul. Kyle shot up from the sofa, slamming his beer can down onto the table with a loud crack, pointing his finger directly into my face. "It's just a damn piece of metal, George. Material objects have absolutely zero meaning to dead people. You are completely overreacting." I turned to him, my teeth grinding together so hard my jaw ached. Material objects have no meaning. But my wife's wedding ring, the absolute most sacred keepsake in this family, has no meaning. Every single thing you leeches are using was paid for by my pension. Michelle shrieked. "Dad, calm down. You are acting like an absolute lunatic." "How much?" I roared, my eyes bloodshot and burning with rage. "How much did you sell it for?" $2,100, she hissed through gritted teeth. A white gold ring with 5 small diamonds, the ultimate symbol of our eternal love, had been tossed into some cheap, seedy pawn shop to pay off their frivolous credit card debt. That night, I sat huddled in the dark, crying uncontrollably. They had ruthlessly stripped away the very last pieces of Helen that I had left. But I still didn't have the immense courage required to fight back. The weak, fragile old man inside me was still trembling in fear. However, that cowardice was officially buried forever the very next day when I uncovered the most sickening, depraved betrayal one human being could ever inflict upon another. I found the file folder on a Wednesday morning. It was October 22nd. I was still meticulously counting the days since Helen had passed away. It had been exactly 18 months, 1 week, and 3 days. I was searching for a pair of gardening shears that Michelle had borrowed, and naturally, never bothered to return. She was at work that day, and Kyle had headed out to the casino. I rummaged through the hallway closet, the kitchen cabinets, and the garage, but I couldn't find them. Finally, I decided to check their bedroom. I opened the second drawer of the dresser, and that was when I spotted a light yellow file folder, carefully tucked away underneath a stack of thick winter sweaters. My gut instinct violently screamed at me to pull it out. The bold text on the very first page slapped me right in the face. Sunset Meadows Nursing Home. It was a glossy promotional brochure featuring pictures of elderly people sitting in wheelchairs. Right behind it was a detailed price list, starting at $4, $200 per month. The horrific answer hit me like a bolt of lightning, sending violently cold shivers down my spine. This house. They were going to forcefully sell this house, use a fraction of the money to lock me away in a facility, and pocket the massive remainder for themselves. I flipped with trembling hands to the third page. It was a formal medical mental capacity assessment form, signed by a doctor named Alan Brennan. I read every single word, my chest feeling like it was being shredded apart. Patient George Patterson, 72 years old. Significant memory impairment, incapable of self-care, recommendation. Requires full-time guardianship at a specialized medical facility. Date of examination: 3 weeks ago. Suddenly everything became as clear as day. 3 weeks ago, I had come down with a severe cold. Dazed and heavily drugged by the medication, I had stumbled through my answers. And based solely on that brief 15-minute interaction, they had officially declared me mentally incompetent and incapable of managing my own affairs. The very last piece of paper in that folder was a formal petition for legal conservatorship, and the petitioner's name prominently displayed was Michelle Patterson. The scheduled date to file this petition with the court, November 5th. That was exactly 2 weeks from today. Their sickening plan was flawlessly ruthless and perfectly executed. They were going to legally strip away my human rights, turning me into an incapacitated ward of the state. They were going to lock me away in Sunset Meadows, a depressing facility reeking of urine and despair, heavily sedating me so I would just lie there obediently and wait for death. Meanwhile, they would legally and justifiably sell this house right out from under me, using the money to continue funding their lavish parasitic lifestyle. A wave of sheer terror rose in my chest. I had visited Helen's mother in a dilapidated nursing home years before she passed. I had sworn to myself that I would never ever let my life end in a place like that. And yet my own flesh and blood, my own daughter, was actively plotting to throw her father into that exact slaughterhouse. But then the terror began to mutate. From the deepest, most barren depths of my soul, a raging inferno of pure fury ignited and began to burn brilliantly. The absolute rock bottom had finally been reached. They had stolen Helen's guitar. They had pawned off her sacred wedding ring. They had violently trampled over my dignity, reducing me to an exhausted, unpaid slave. And now they wanted to steal my last remaining shred of freedom and my very life. No, absolutely not. Never in a million years. There wasn't going to be any nursing home. There wasn't going to be a tragic, pathetic ending for George Patterson. I carefully placed the stack of files right back where I found it, smoothed the thick sweaters over it, and quietly closed the drawer, making absolutely certain to leave no trace of my discovery. I walked out of their bedroom, my face an unreadable mask of ice, but inside my mind, a ruthless, razor-sharp plan had already begun to take shape. That night, I laid rigidly on my cramped little bed, my eyes wide open, staring at the dark ceiling. I listened to their heavy footsteps and carefree laughter echoing from the living room. My pension was still legally in my name, and my mind was perfectly, incredibly sharp. The counterattack had officially begun. On Thursday morning, I woke up early as usual, carefully sticking to my ingrained routine so as not to alert them to anything. I brewed the coffee, fried the eggs, and meticulously ironed Kyle's dress shirt. When they finally dragged themselves to the breakfast table, I hesitantly made my announcement. I need to go out for a little bit today to sort out some old inheritance paperwork of Helen's, I said, forcing my voice to sound as exhausted and senile as humanly possible. Michelle immediately stopped chewing, looking up with a highly suspicious, alert glare. What kind of paperwork? Just leave it here. I'll take care of it on my lunch break. You're too weak to be wandering around. What if you get confused and forget your way home? No, I replied, the words slipping out with a rare sudden firmness that even startled me. I quickly softened it with a long, heavy, dramatic sigh. The lawyer insisted I have to be there in person. It will just be a quick trip. Kyle shrugged, utterly indifferent to my existence. He went back to shoveling eggs into his mouth. Just let him go, Michelle. A walk will probably do the old man some good. He's just annoying when he wanders around the house all day anyway. I grabbed my faded coat and walked out the front door. The brisk chill of the October morning slapped my face, making my mind feel incredibly, sharply awake. My palms were slick with sweat. The terrifying specter of Sunset Meadows nursing home hovered constantly in my mind, violently urging me to move faster. The bank was relatively empty. I walked straight up to the teller counter and requested to speak with an account manager, a young woman, perhaps in her early 30s, wearing a name tag that read Jessica Morgan. came out to greet me with a warm, genuinely friendly smile. "Good morning, Mr. Patterson. How can I help you today?" she asked, gesturing for me to sit down in a plush leather chair in her office. I sat down, clasping my trembling hands tightly together. My throat was incredibly dry, and it took me a few seconds to find my voice. "Hello, Jessica." I cleared my throat. "I need to see the complete transaction history for my bank account. For the entire past 3 years." Jessica's friendly smile faltered slightly. She typed rapidly on her keyboard, her eyes scanning the computer monitor. "That is going to be a very substantial amount of pages, sir. Are you absolutely certain you want all of it printed out?" "I am absolutely certain." I looked her directly in the eyes. "Please, print every single page." The large office printer roared to life. It hummed continuously, spitting out page after page after page. The printing process dragged on for so long that time seemed to stand completely still. When the machine finally fell silent, Jessica carefully gathered the massive stack of paper, stapled the corners, and handed the incredibly heavy, dense document to me. 53 pages, sir," she said softly. I took the thick stack with shaking hands. I started reading from the very first page, January 2023. The first line of every single month was always good news. Social Security pension direct deposit, twos $300. But immediately below it was a massive, never-ending list of frantic, exorbitant withdrawals. There were absolutely zero medical bills for me, and absolutely zero transfers to a savings account. I dragged my trembling finger down the lines. Morton Steakhouse, $120. Sephora Cosmetics, 3 gas stations, shopping malls, Amazon online purchases. I flipped to the next page, and then the next. Hundreds of dollars were evaporating into thin air every single week. By the time I reached the transactions from June, my eyes were completely blurred with sheer shock. June 15th, Miami Airlines, $800. July 8th, Best Buy Electronics, $400. September 9th, KJ Jewelers, $650. The horrific cycle repeated itself relentlessly. My hard-earned money was being squandered on things I had never laid eyes on, places I had never visited, and luxury items I would never even dare to dream of. They were mercilessly draining my lifeblood to violently fund their extravagant, parasitic, lazy lifestyle. When I finally reached the very last page, my hands were shaking uncontrollably, the numbers blurring through the hot tears I could no longer suppress. The grand total, $85,000, 85, had vanished without a trace. I buried my face in my hands, my shoulders heaving with heavy sobs. I broke down crying, right there in the middle of the bank, right in front of Jessica and the other customers. I wept for my own profound stupidity. I wept for the terrible weakness that had allowed this evil to fester. And I wept for the unimaginable, ultimate cruelty of the daughter I had once loved with all my heart. $85,000. That was countless overnight hauls in the truck, freezing meals at lonely rest stops, my lost youth, and my literal blood, sweat, and tears. Jessica didn't say a single word. She just quietly slid a box of tissues across the desk toward me. She patiently waited for my sobbing to subside before she spoke, her voice incredibly gentle. "Mr. Patterson," she said, her eyes filled with profound empathy and deep understanding. "You are not alone in this, and most importantly, it is not too late to put a permanent stop to it." I looked up, aggressively wiping the tears from my face and tossing the crumpled tissue into the trash. My eyes now held nothing but cold, hardened, absolute determination. "How much money is left in the account right now?" I demanded, my voice turning to gravel. Jessica tapped her keyboard. $412. $400 remaining out of $85,000. They had bled it completely dry. "Move it," I growled, glaring fiercely at her computer monitor. "Right, this exact second. Transfer every single remaining penny into that new account. And close this rotten, drained account immediately." "I will do that right now," Jessica replied, her fingers flying across the keyboard with incredible speed. "One more thing," I continued. "Can you help me reroute my Social Security pension direct deposits into this brand new account?" "Absolutely, sir. Your pension will be deposited into the new account, starting with your very next payment cycle, which is November 1st. The remaining balance has been transferred, and I am issuing a brand new debit card for you right now." "When will I get the card?" 5 business days, sir. The card will be mailed directly to your home and should arrive by next Tuesday. 5 days, I repeated, taking a deep, shuddering breath. Yes, Mr. Patterson. I truly wish you the best of luck. Jessica handed me a neat folder containing my new account information, along with a business card for a free legal aid organization specifically for seniors. I walked out of the bank. The bright sunlight hit my face directly. For the first time after 3 agonizing years of drowning in darkness, the outside air had never tasted so pure and liberating. I shoved the massive 53-page stack of bank statements deep into the inside pocket of my coat and patted my chest firmly. 5 days. I just needed to play the role of the obedient fool for exactly 5 more days. 5 days to prepare the battlefield for the final, explosive confrontation. Those 5 days of waiting dragged on like an entire agonizing century, every passing second stretching my nerves until they were ready to snap. I returned home and immediately slipped right back behind the pathetic mask of the frail, obedient and senile old man. I continued to cook their breakfasts, wash their filthy dishes, do their laundry, and clean up the disgusting messes Kyle constantly left behind. Why would they ever suspect anything? In their arrogant eyes, I was nothing more than a completely domesticated, broken animal. On the 3rd day of waiting, Kyle seemed to notice something slightly off. He leaned against the kitchen counter while I was vigorously scrubbing the sink. "You've been acting kind of weird lately," Kyle said, narrowing his eyes at me suspiciously. "Are you hiding something, old man?" I kept my hands moving, scrubbing the sponge in a steady, monotonous rhythm. I deliberately slumped my shoulders, looking completely defeated. "I am exhausted every single day. My back is killing me." He shrugged, his momentary suspicion instantly snuffed out by his usual overwhelming arrogance. "Well, hurry it up and get dinner ready." On the 5th day, the fateful Tuesday finally arrived. The postal truck pulled up to the curb at exactly 11 a.m. I held my breath, pretending to sweep the front porch just so I could intercept the mail before Kyle woke up from his lazy slumber. Tucked neatly between the utility bills was a crisp white envelope bearing the National Bank logo. It had my name on it, George Patterson. I frantically shoved it under my shirt, walked straight into my tiny back room, and locked the door tight. My hands were shaking wildly as I ripped the envelope open. A shiny silver debit card fell out into my palm. I grabbed my cell phone, dialed the automated activation line, and activated the card using Helen's birthday as the PIN. "Your card has been successfully activated. Your next direct deposit will automatically route to this account." The robotic electronic voice chimed, sounding more beautiful than a grand symphony. I officially had the weapon in my hands. The new month's pension was already sitting safely in this card. The weak, submissive, cowardly old man was officially dead. A proud, free, and vengeful George Patterson had been resurrected. Now, all I had to do was wait for Thursday morning, when Kyle would inevitably drag himself to the ATM to withdraw his free cash, exactly like the pathetic parasite he was. That Thursday morning I woke up incredibly early, brewed a fragrant cup of coffee, and took a leisurely, refreshing walk outside to buy a few flower bulbs. When I finally returned home, the curtains were officially raised for the final act, the exact moment I stepped through the front door and was confronted by Michelle and Kyle, who were waiting for me with faces flushed with furious rage. "Dad," Michelle instantly changed her demeanor, her voice pleading as she drastically shifted from the aggressive attacker to playing the role of the miserable victim. "You're going to ruin us. We cannot survive without that money. We need it." She stopped abruptly, seemingly realizing what she had just blatantly admitted in her panic. They didn't view me as a father. They viewed me as nothing more than a personal, bottomless ATM machine. And that ATM, as of today, was officially permanently out of service. Kyle roared, lunging toward me and aggressively pointing his finger right in my face. "You think you can just do that? You are living in my house. You have to pay for your room and board." I burst out laughing, a loud, boisterous, completely uninhibited laugh filled with absolute contempt. The sheer volume and unexpectedness of my laughter made both Kyle and Michelle physically flinch and step back in shock. I reached deep into the inside pocket of my heavy coat and pulled out the thick folded stack of bank statements. I threw it violently down onto the glass coffee table. A sharp, dry smack echoed through the tense room. "Here. I pointed furiously at the stack of papers. 53 pages of bank statements. $85,000 over the last 3 years. You two parasites have robbed me blind of $85,000. Kyle's eyes nearly bulged out of his skull. He frantically grabbed the stack of papers, flipping wildly through the pages. His hands were shaking uncontrollably. The color in his face drained from a flushed red to a ghastly, sickening pale. This is a private account. What right do you have to? He stammered, completely losing his arrogant swagger. The absolute right of the primary account holder. I growled, my voice laced with venom. Did you really think I was completely blind and senile? September 9th, KJ Jewelers for $650. That's the exact same necklace you're wearing around your neck right now, Michelle. Michelle collapsed into a chair, her hands flying up to clutch her throat, as if the heavy gold necklace was physically strangling her. She broke down into violent, hysterical sobs. We are drowning in debt. If you cut off the money, we're going to be thrown out on the street. Then go out on the street. I snapped back ruthlessly. Both of you, how much longer were you planning on sucking my blood dry? Were you going to wait until you finally managed to lock this old man away in Sunset Meadows nursing home using a forged, fraudulent mental health certificate? That sentence struck Michelle like a physical sword, slicing right through her chest. Her head snapped up, her face as pale as a fresh corpse. What are you talking about? Do not insult my intelligence by thinking I'm blind. I ground my teeth together. The yellow folder hidden underneath the sweaters in your drawer. You drugged me with cold medicine and dragged me to a fake clinic just to falsely accuse me of having dementia. You wanted to lock me away in a facility just so you could steal the rest of this house. Kyle completely lost his mind. He threw the stack of papers violently onto the floor and lunged at me, raising his fist to strike. You miserable old bastard, I'm going to kill. You lay one finger on me and try it. I didn't flinch, didn't step back. I leaned forward and glared at him with the chilling intensity of a man who no longer had any fear of death. Hit me. The police will be here in exactly 5 minutes, and I will personally make absolutely certain you rot in federal prison for felony elder abuse. Kyle froze instantly, his raised fist hovering uselessly in midair. Stop right there, a sharp, authoritative voice boomed from the wide-open front door. All three of us whipped our heads around. The cavalry had finally arrived. Leonard, my absolute best friend from our days serving in the military together, stood imposing in the doorway, flanked by 2 fully uniformed police officers. During the darkest period of my depression and the subsequent isolation enforced by my own daughter, I had completely cut off contact with Leonard. But on Monday, 3 full days before this explosive confrontation, I had snuck out and called him from a public payphone. On Thursday, he didn't just come alone. He had officially reported an ongoing conspiracy of financial fraud and severe elder abuse to the authorities. What seems to be the problem here, officers? Kyle instantly changed his tune, transforming from a rabid, violent beast into a meek, groveling coward, holding both hands up in the air to show he was harmless. We were just having a minor family disagreement. The old man hasn't been thinking too clearly lately. Oh, he's thinking a hell of a lot more clearly than you are, son, the older police officer stated firmly, stepping fully into the house, his sharp eyes instantly assessing the scattered bank statements on the floor and the glass table. We received a highly credible report regarding suspected financial fraud, grand larceny, and a criminal conspiracy to unlawfully strip a citizen of their legal rights. Michelle burst into tears again, but this time they were tears of absolute, unadulterated panic. No, don't arrest us. We just borrowed the money temporarily. I'm his flesh and blood daughter. Dad, please, tell them. Leonard walked over and stood right beside me, clapping a firm, reassuring hand on my shoulder. Hello, George. Your pal, Dr. Brennan, is currently sitting in an interrogation room. Hearing Brennan's name, Kyle stumbled backward as if he had been physically struck, crashing into the armchair and collapsing into it. He knew it was over. The grand, sickening illusion had completely shattered. Mr. Patterson. The officer turned to me respectfully. How would you like to proceed with this situation? I looked down at Michelle, the little girl I had once held in my arms, sung to sleep, and sacrificed my entire adult life to protect. For a fleeting fraction of a second, the heart of a father felt a tiny twinge of pain. But then I vividly recalled the exact agonizing moment I discovered Helen's sacred wedding ring was missing, and every single drop of pity evaporated without a trace. "I am giving them exactly 1 hour," I said, my voice as cold as liquid nitrogen. "Pack up all of their personal belongings and get the hell out of my house. Immediately, or I will press full criminal charges for the theft and fraud of $85,000. The next 60 minutes were unequivocally the most deeply satisfying moments I had experienced in the last 3 years. I sat proudly in Helen's old reading chair, slowly sipping the coffee I had brewed that morning, watching them frantically and pathetically shove their clothes into suitcases. The 2 police officers stood with their arms crossed in the hallway, closely supervising to ensure they didn't try to sneak out with a single item that didn't legally belong to them. "That's the flat-screen TV I bought with my own credit card," Kyle screamed when one of the officers physically blocked him from lifting the massive television. "A credit card that was paid off using Mr. Patterson's stolen pension funds," the officer replied, his tone razor-sharp and uncompromising. "Put it down." They were forced to leave with exactly what they had brought with them 3 years ago. A few cheap changes of clothes, absolutely zero cash to their names, getting kicked out onto the curb like stray dogs. Michelle dragged her suitcase past me, her puffy, tear-stained eyes glaring at me with raw venom. "Dad, you are no longer my father. I never want to see your face again as long as I live." "Good." I took a calm sip of my coffee, not even bothering to look up from the sports section of the newspaper. That saves me the price of a stamp for a Christmas card. When the heavy oak front door slammed shut behind them for the final time, returning absolute, peaceful silence to the house, I let the newspaper drop to my lap. I closed my eyes and took a long, deep breath. The air was no longer suffocating, thick with tension and disgusting hypocrisy. The house was finally mine again. "You doing okay, old friend?" Leonard asked, taking a seat in the chair opposite me. "I have never been better in my entire life, Leo," I replied, and for the first time in 3 long, agonizing years a genuine warm smile bloomed across my face. "But I still have one very important errand left to run." 3 days later, Leonard drove me downtown, pulling up in front of a dingy, run-down pawn shop sandwiched between 2 dirty convenience stores. Thanks to the pawn receipt the police had confiscated from Michelle's designer purse, I knew exactly where they had discarded Helen's priceless keepsakes. The shop owner, a balding man with thick, greasy glasses, scrutinized me through a pane of bulletproof glass. "I am looking for a Martin D28 acoustic guitar, manufactured in '88, with the name Helen Patterson engraved inside the sound hole, and a white gold wedding ring set with 5 small diamonds." He clicked his tongue dismissively. "The guitar. But the ring, let me check the safe." After 15 agonizing minutes of rummaging through a heavy iron safe, he finally pulled out a faded velvet box. When he popped the lid open, the sparkling light catching the 5 small diamonds hit my eyes. It was it, Helen's ring, $2,500, he grunted bluntly. I didn't hesitate for a single microsecond, whipping out the brand new debit card I had just activated to pay for it. Holding the small ring tightly in my palm, pressing it firmly against my chest, I swear I could feel the lingering warmth of my beloved wife. A profound piece of her soul had finally returned home. Even though I couldn't track down the guitar, the police were incredibly successful in their investigation into Dr. Brennan. He had his medical license permanently revoked and was currently facing significant prison time for his central role in medical fraud and elder abuse conspiracies. And what about Michelle and Kyle? They weren't nearly as lucky. I chose not to press criminal charges against them, not out of some misplaced sense of forgiveness, but simply because I wanted them to suffer through the rest of their miserable lives in crushing poverty and disgrace, forced to painfully earn every single penny to pay off the massive hole they dug for themselves. Sending them to a comfortable prison cell would have been far too easy of an escape for what they had done. 3 years have passed since that incredible day of reckoning, and I am now 75 years old. My home is no longer a silent, suffocating tomb. I have actively transformed it into a place overflowing with vibrant life. Our massive master bedroom remains perfectly preserved as a beautiful shrine to Helen's memory, but I renovated the other empty guest rooms. and turned them into boarding spaces for an international student exchange program. The house is now constantly filled with the joyous laughter, lively conversations, and boundless positive energy of young people from all corners of the globe. I joined a local community gardening club, and every single weekend I host a rowdy poker night with Leonard and our old military buddies. I also adopted a wonderfully goofy golden retriever named Buster, who always lays obediently right at my feet whenever I sit down by the window to read a good book. Every single morning I wake up at 5 a.m., personally brew a fragrant pot of coffee just the way I like it, and sit out on the patio table. I sip my coffee and watch the vibrant flowers I planted with my own 2 hands bloom beautifully under the morning sun. My breakfast is no longer prepared to serve an ungrateful master. It is prepared solely for me to savor and enjoy. Helen's diamond wedding ring has been carefully threaded onto a sturdy silver chain, and I wear it tightly against my chest, right over my heart every single day. Sometimes when I'm sitting quietly and admiring my garden, I briefly recall the fake, manipulative tears of my own daughter. The deep, agonizing pain of her ultimate betrayal is still there, a permanent, jagged scar on my soul that will never fully fade. But I learned an incredibly valuable, excruciatingly expensive lesson paid for with my own blood and tears. The love of family is completely priceless, but that absolutely does not mean you have to lay down and become a helpless victim to greedy parasites, even if they happen to share your bloodline. Unconditional sacrifice sometimes only serves as the fertile soil that nurtures selfish, entitled monsters. Boundaries are absolute necessities that must be fiercely protected at all costs, and the absolute greatest power a human being can ever possess is their own total independence. Never, ever hand the keys to your life, your finances, or your freedom over to anyone else, not even the people you brought into this world. Thank you all so much for listening to my story. The lesson I learned may have cost me a tremendous amount of bitterness, pain, and lost time, but it ultimately gave me back my absolute freedom and dignity. If you found any meaning or value in this story, please hit the like button and share it, so that anyone else out there who might be trapped in a similar nightmare can find the courage and strength to stand up and fiercely protect themselves. I will see you all again in the next story.